Hello everyone and welcome to Keen Ear, and it's time once again for a ranking video. This time it's the Rolling Stones and their 60s albums, and I like to refer to this era as the Brian Jones era, and I am a big Brian Jones fan. I feel like he really was a great asset to the Stones. It's just a shame, of course, that it wasn't to last and it wasn't really to be, of course, in the end, but I really do feel like he was the George Harrison of the group in many ways. He added this different dimension, incorporating different musical styles and different, unique and interesting sort of exotic musical instruments into the group. The group sound, and I don't think generally the Stones were ever quite as, and this is a generalisation, of course, but I don't think they were generally quite as good or as interesting after Brian's departure. And I'd have loved to have heard the likes of Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street when if Brian was around to have any involvement with them. But of course that was never to really be. So we'll start this ranking video off with my least favourite Stones album. Now, just because it's my least favourite doesn't mean I dislike it. A lot of people seem to get confused when they watch these ranking videos. They seem to think because you put something at the bottom that you hate it, and that's their favourite album, so you've offended them in some way. And even though you've got like a first edition press of something that's quite rare and quite hard to get hold of, you hate this album, which doesn't really make a great deal of sense why you would do that. Of course, I like all these albums that are featured in these ranking videos. And unless I state otherwise, I really hate them. I'm showing these records because I like them to some degree. It's just that I have to show some records at the very bottom because that's the way a ranking video works. So I do like all of these albums. I have to explain this for some people out there who get confused very easily. I'm sorry for everybody else, but I do like all of these albums. It's just that I have to put something at the bottom. So this is my least favourite album, not an album that I hate. See the difference? And this is the album I'm showing at the bottom, which is number 2, the second Rolling Stones album. And the reason why I put this at the bottom, even though I don't hate it or anything like that, is because it's the least remarkable Stones album really of this particular era, the 60s era. And it's effectively just a continuation of their first album. It even has a very similar sort of cover to their first album. And I think mainly just for that reason I put it at the bottom. But it does have some good stuff on it. It has Time Is On My Side, which is an early Stones sort of classic. And, generally it's a good, fun, interesting Stones album to a degree, because, this is the formation, still very much the formation of the Stones. They were still very much starting out at this time, as a recording group at least. So yeah, it's a pretty good album. I do like it, but it's just not fairly remarkable. And I think I would rather listen to either their first album or their third album over this one. So we'll move on now to the next Stones album I'm going for. The next one up. And it's their Satanic Majesties Request. And the reason why I put this one up higher than number 2, and a lot of people would put this rank, right at the bottom, even in terms of, the entire Stones back catalogue, incorporating everything more than just the 60s, a lot of people would actually put this still at the bottom. And, I wouldn't necessarily have a great deal of a problem with somebody doing that, because I do agree that there's some of the weakest material that the Stones ever recorded on here. Even Keith Richards and Mick have come out and said, that this album is rubbish and that kind of thing. But I don't think this is just purely a curiosity album for Stones fans, because I think there is some genuinely good stuff on here. She's a Rainbow, for instance, is a classic Stones track. 2000 Light Years From Home is pretty damn good as well. There's some good stuff on here, but it's just generally, overall, not a great album by any means. But it is at least interesting. There is the Stones trying to do something different. There is the Stones trying to do something more experimental. And it's just got this different feel that you just generally don't have with all the other Stones albums. Now, a lot of people might like the fact that no other Stones albums kind of sounds like this. They never tried to do this thing again. I'm kind of in the other way. I'm kind of disappointed that they never kind of pushed themselves to do something as interesting as this or as different as this. You know, they never really took the gamble. They sort of made a little sort of style of music for themselves largely and kind of stuck to it for pretty much ever, really. So yeah, I think if they did more of this, I'd probably, you know, appreciate the music just generally, particularly once you get into the later period of the Stones' back catalogue. But anyway, that's my next choice. I'm following up with the Stones' third album, which is Out of Their Heads. These are all the UK albums where it's relevant, and they started to merge together, you know, and unify towards the, you know, with the American albums by, you know, similar to the Beatles really. They had different albums in the UK and the US, but these are just the UK ones I'm focusing on if anyone's wondering, because they do have similar covers and that sort of thing. But yeah, this is where the Stones start to sound like the Rolling Stones to a degree. You know, they start to sound less like one of the many blues groups that existed at this time in the UK. And the reason why there were so many blues groups at this time is because the vast majority of clubs, particularly in London, were divided up. You know, and London was the home, of course, there's so many groups, you know, so many groups have come out of London. So, you know, you had a choice really with a lot of these clubs. You know, you either became a jazz band and, you know, you played traditional jazz at, you know, jazz clubs, or you became a blues group like the Stones. And there really wasn't a great deal of choice elsewhere. You know, if you wanted to work regularly and that sort of thing, you had to pick a side. And they had this very sort of zero tolerance, a lot of them, to rock and roll. You know, they just didn't, you know, they told the band and or whoever was performing, you know, do not play any rock and roll. They just don't want it at all. You get thrown off stage. You'll get, you know, barred from the performing again and, you know, that sort of thing. And the reason why they were so, you know, even you know, the Beatles had this sort of issue in the Hamburg days, I believe. You know, the Hamburg was much more anything goes. But even so, the Beatles would perform with strippers on stage and that sort of thing. But even then, and in Hamburg, you know, there was like you know, they were more strict when it came to rock and roll. You know, if the owner was around and the Beatles were getting too rock and roll, he'd you know, ask them to calm down a bit, you know, and do something else and that sort of thing. And, you know, John Lennon would, you know, curse at him and do Nazi salutes and all this kind of thing. And you think even in Hamburg, you know, there was this sort of, you know, no rock and roll sort of, or less rock and roll sort of, you know, standpoint. And the main reason for that is because clubs effectively didn't want to attract teddy boys who would come along and, in certain cases, trash the place and get into fights and take drugs and all these kind of things. So that was the main reason why they were like that. And I think one of the reasons why the Stones, you know, were successful, you know, compared to so many other bands at the time, partly because, you know, they were, I think, more talented just generally than most other bands, but I think they generally loved blues music. And a lot of them, I guess, maybe didn't, but they were forced to because they wanted to get gigs and they wanted to perform. So it was like, okay, we're going to have to be a blues group, and, you know, hopefully that's going to, you know, get us somewhere and we can do what we want after that. And a lot of times that doesn't work out, but with the Stones, you know, with the combination of the talent that they had and the songwriting abilities and everything else, they were able to become, you know, a big group and a famous group and a standout group at the time because, you know, they genuinely did like the blues. So yeah, this is a bit of a standout album, even though it's got a number of covers on it. You know, it's mostly covers. I think it's a bit more varied in style, and they're starting to form, you know, a real sort of sound at this point. You know, the typical sort of Rolling Stones sound, and they're not quite so heavy in the blues sort of standard covers and that sort of thing. So I went on a tangent a bit there. I'm sorry, but anyway, that's the next choice I've gone for, and I'll follow it up with this. This is the Stones' first album. And yeah, I do have a bit of a soft spot for this. I think the main reason why I hold this in quite high regard is because this is really the only truly rough sounding, you know, rough and ready sounding Stones album recorded. You know, this was recorded in 4 days because Decca wouldn't give the Stones any more time because they were just trialling them really at this point effectively. So it was get them in, get them out. And the Stones have effectively, you know, over the years have tried to, you know, recapture that sort of rough and ready sound, you know, because usually when an artist or a group come out, you know, and they have their first album and it's rough and ready sound, and sometimes it doesn't work. But with the Stones, it kind of works very much for their style, you know, because that's what they're kind of all about, really. You know, this kind of bad boys of popular music and that sort of thing. And you know, the fact is, for the past so many decades now, the Stones have been able to take their pick of any recording studio in the entire world. You know, they can pick the best of the best, and they can record for as long as they want. And even so, they try to make this rough and ready sound sort of thing. They try and make it, you know, but all that's fake, of course. You know, it's all fake. But with this, it's not fake. It's genuine. This is a genuinely rough and ready album for that reason, really, mainly. And plus the fact that they find this album kind of charming to a certain degree as well. You know, the track "Tell Me" in particular, I think that's just a great sort of knockabout track. I really like that. So. Yeah, it's an album that I definitely have a bit of a soft spot for, and it's definitely rough and ready, and it works for the Stones, and it's the only truly, maybe with the exception of the second album as well, perhaps, but this is more so the case. The only truly rough and ready record that the Stones put out. So, following now up with this is Aftermath. This is a standout album, definitely. I think from this point on, all the albums are going to be going through, you need to kind of listen to if you're either trying to get into the Stones or you're just trying to dig a bit deeper in the Stones music, and this is one you definitely need to listen to. This album proved that it wasn't just the Beatles that could make an album of all their own songs that could be successful as well. The Stones could do it as well. All the songs on this are by the Stones, and there's some really good stuff on here. The only issue with this album is, for me, I think some of the stuff on it is great. I think some of the stuff on it is, I wouldn't say bad or anything like that, it's just not particularly that brilliant really overall. It's a bit sort of, you know, not fantastic or anything, not bad but just not fantastic, so I think it kind of weighs it down a little bit. Whereas the first album of entirely, you know, entire compositions from, you know, the Stones themselves, it's perfectly fine, and I think it is a good album, and it is a standout album, it is an important album for the Stones. So I'll move on now to this. This is Between the Buttons, and yeah, I think the only real reason why I like this album quite so much is because it's a great deep cut album. The Stones themselves, I believe Mick Jagger in particular doesn't like this album. I think that's part of the reason why so many of the songs on here never really appeared on any sort of, or many should I say, compilations. You know, there's tons and tons of Stones compilations out there, and I think besides Yesterday's Papers, which appeared on at least one of the 1970s compilations, I can't remember which one, but it does appear, you know, on one of them. But besides that, this is all pretty obscure stuff. It's quite a you know, it probably is the best deep cut Rolling Stones album. I think there's a lot of kind of obscure 60s tracks on this particular album. I think it's more deep cut than really anything else, and for that reason alone I like it, because it doesn't have the same old Stones songs over and over again, which many of them I'm really sick of hearing. So yeah, I do have a soft spot mainly for that reason, because it is a great deep cut release. So I'll move on now to the top two, and there's two types of Rolling Stones fans out there. There's Let It Bleed fans, and there's particularly when it comes to this era, and there's a Beggars Banquet, and you kind of lean one way or the other generally, and I lean on the Beggars Banquet era, so I'm going to put Let It Bleed as my second most favourite Stones album from this era, and I'm going to put, obviously I put Beggars Banquet, but I'll leave that to a little bit, of course. And this is a strong, solid album. The only real reason, I think, if anything, I think there's some material on this which is better than Beggars Banquet. The only reason, though, why I put this second from top rather than top, in all honesty, is because this has three songs on it which I'm kind of sick of hearing to a certain degree, and Beggars Banquet only has two. It's kind of as simple as that, really. This has Midnight Rambler, which is, I'm kind of getting a bit sick of hearing that one in all honesty. It's not too bad, but it's getting that way. Gimme Shelter, I'm sick of hearing Gimme Shelter. You know, it's a great track and everything, but I'm tired of it. You can't always get what you want as well, is the third one, and it wraps the album up, and it's like, oh, that one again, you know, once the choir starts singing again, you know, here we go again, sort of thing. So for that reason, I'm putting this not number one effectively, but it does have some really great stuff on it. I really love, you've got the Silver, which for my money is the best Keith Richards vocal track, you know, lead vocal track. I think that's the best track of all the Rolling Stones songs that, you know, have ever been. I think that's the best that, you know, Keith's been the lead vocal. I also like Let It Bleed, which is a great track. Country Honk, which is a great version of Honky Tonk Women. So yeah, it's got some good stuff on it. Love in Vain, which is a pretty good cover song as well. So yeah, it's a really good album. But I have to go for this one. It's Beggars Banquet, of course. It's got Symphony for the Devil, opens the album, and I'm tired of that song completely. Usually what I do when I play this is I skip that track and go straight to No Expectations. And on side 2, it's got another opening track, Street Fighting Man, which I'm tired of hearing. So typically what I do with that one is I skip that one as well. So I flip the record over and then I go to Prodigal Son. I go straight to Prodigal Son, and all the rest of the tracks on this are more, you know, less well overplayed, should we say. You know, Parachute Woman and Factory Girl and Salt of the Earth, Jigsaw Puzzle, Dear Doctor, good stuff on here just generally. And it's the last sort of true Brian Jones album as well. You know, he had some involvement with just touches of Let It Bleed really, but this is like his last album where he had, you know, a decent amount of involvement when he actually showed up and that sort of thing, and was somewhat involved in the creation, you know, before you know, he ultimately just stopped showing up and got kicked out of the group and everything like that. So yeah, it's significant in that regard as well. The last true Brian Jones album, which he was involved with. So that's it for this video. Got it in under 20 minutes, even though I was rambling about jazz clubs and you know, blues clubs and that sort of thing in the 1960s, and giving a bit of a history lesson. But you know, we got there in the end. So thanks for watching this, guys, and I'll make some follow-up video maybe one day, going through you know, 70s perhaps and that sort of thing. But I've kind of already given away that, you know, Exile on Main Street is my favourite Stones album. So if we'll go through the 70s, you know, number one already, I'm gonna, you know, might as well just say is going to be Exile on Main Street. It is my favourite Stones album. It's one of my favourite albums of all time. And you know, Brian Jones was dead by the time that album was made. So you know, and it wasn't made in the 60s. So even though I love the 60s era, the stuff in the early 70s I think was pretty damn great as well. It's just a shame that they couldn't carry it on, you know, to the, you know, any longer. But they did some great stuff as well in the 70s. So we'll follow it up. We'll incorporate more albums from different eras. I definitely have a lot less to say about those albums, so I'd imagine those videos are going to be a lot less rambly, which might please quite a few people, or in fact probably will please everybody really who's watching these videos. So anyway, thanks for watching everyone, and goodbye.